Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of Centauri Racing Station, watching alien ships streak past in practice runs that pushed the boundaries of physics. Their crafts moved with impossible grace, piloted by beings whose neural processes operated at speeds that made human thinking look glacial. At least, that's what they claimed. The Galactic Racing Federation had initially laughed when she applied for a racing license. Humans are remarkable for achieving spaceflight with such primitive neural architecture, the Scatheri representative had said, mandibles clicking in what she now recognized as amusement. But racing requires precision at relativistic speeds. Your species simply lacks the processing power. Sarah unconsciously touched the interface port at the base of her skull, standard human augmentation these days, but practically Stone Age technology to the other races. The implant didn't enhance her thinking speed. It just helped her interface with her ship. The aliens had their own direct neural links that were supposedly thousands of times faster. Final call for preliminary heat 7. The announcement resonated through her bones in that peculiar way station communications always did. All pilots to their vessels. Sarah turned from the viewport and walked to her ship, the Terran Ghost. It wasn't the most advanced vessel in the competition. Far from it. The other pilots flew ships grown in quantum forges, vessels that existed in multiple probability states until the moment of acceleration. The Ghost was practically a hot rod by comparison, built from salvaged parts and human ingenuity. As she approached, her crew chief, Marcus, was arguing with a race official. The Foran's crystalline body sparkled with patterns that Sarah had learned indicated skepticism. "Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline already pumping through her system. "They're saying our inertial dampeners don't meet minimum safety requirements," Marcus said, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the official's translated text floating in the air between them. The Foran's light patterns shifted to what Sarah recognized as condescension. "Your dampening field operates on crude gravitonic principles. The neural stress at racing velocities would liquefy a human brain." Sarah smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "The dampeners are rated for the speeds. We tested them extensively. In simulations, perhaps. But in actual runs," Sarah interrupted. "Solo qualifying speeds. Check your records." The Foran's patterns flickered rapidly. Surprise, then confusion. Sarah knew what they were seeing. 3 weeks ago, she'd taken the Ghost out alone and pushed it to qualifying velocity. The run was technically legal, though most considered it suicidal to attempt qualification without the usual years of lower-tier racing. She had completed the course with times that put her in the middle of the pack. Not spectacular, but enough to earn her spot. The officials had been so shocked they'd tested her for everything from drugs to illegal neural enhancement. They'd found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Just human determination and a different way of thinking about the problem. "The registrations are in order," Marcus added quietly, "and the preliminary heat starts in 15 minutes. The foreign official oscillated through several color patterns before finally settling on resignation. "Any neural damage will be your own responsibility." "Noted," Sarah said, already climbing into the Ghost's cockpit. As the canopy lowered, she heard the official adding her race to their betting pool. Betting against her, of course. The Ghost's systems came online as the neural interface connected. Sarah felt the ship become an extension of herself, but not in the way the aliens did it, where they attempted to process every variable consciously. She had worked with Marcus to develop something different. Something human. The Ghost's quantum computer handled the raw physics calculations, feeding the results directly to her visual cortex as intuitive signals. Light, motion, pressure. She didn't need to think about vector calculations or relativistic effects. She just needed to feel the race. "Ghost, you are cleared for Launch Tube 3, the controller announced. May your neurons survive the experience." Sarah guided her ship into the launch tube, taking deep breaths as the magnetic accelerators charge. Around her, she knew the other pilots were running last-minute calculations, their advanced minds processing millions of variables. She closed her eyes and listened to the thrum of her engine, feeling the way the ghost wanted to move. The aliens thought humans were too slow because they tried to outthink physics. Sarah had learned you didn't have to outthink it. You just had to feel it. The countdown started. The countdown started. Sarah opened her eyes, her hands light on the controls. The launch tube stretched before her, leading out into a course that bent through the gravity wells of 3 different stellar bodies. The other pilots would follow predetermined optimal paths, adjusting for variables at faster than human speeds. Sarah planned to improvise. The countdown hit 0, and the magnetic accelerators fired. The ghost shot forward, and Sarah felt herself smile as the universe blurred around her. Let them think humans were slow. She was about to show the galaxy what speed really meant. Ahead of her, reality twisted as ships accelerated to velocities that made Einstein nervous. Sarah followed, not fighting the physics but flowing with it, letting her human brain do what it did best: adapt. The race had begun. Sarah's qualification run had left the alien racing community buzzing with theories. As she sat in the Ghost's maintenance bay, watching Marcus adjust the neural interface, she could hear the whispers. Some claimed she must be using illegal technology. Others insisted she had gotten lucky. None of them considered the possibility that humans might have an advantage. "They're still trying to figure out how you're processing the course data," Marcus said, his cybernetic eye projecting diagnostic readings onto the bay wall. "The Scytheri analyst asked to see our neural mapping protocols again." Sarah laughed. "Did you show them?" "Of course. They spent 3 hours analyzing them before declaring our approach primitively insufficient and suggesting we upgrade to a standard alien racing package." Marcus closed the access panel on the neural interface. "They're so focused on raw processing speed that they can't see what's actually happening." What was happening had taken Sarah months to understand herself. While alien pilots processed everything consciously, every vector, every gravitational influence, every quantum probability, humans had evolved to handle complex tasks differently. Pattern recognition, intuition, the ability to make snap decisions without analyzing every variable. The Ghost's computer wasn't trying to replace Sarah's brain with something faster. It was working with her brain's natural abilities, presenting complex data in ways that triggered human instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. A sharp chime interrupted her thoughts. "Attention all pilots," the station AI announced. "The course for Heat 7 has been modified due to unexpected solar activity. Updated parameters are being distributed now." Sarah watched as the other pilots received the update, their ship's quantum processors immediately beginning to calculate new optimal routes. But she was looking at something else. The visual representation of the course showing a massive solar flare that would interact with the usual racing lanes. "They're all going to avoid it," she said, standing up. "Their computers will calculate the safest route around the disruption." Marcus nodded. "Standard procedure. The radiation alone would be lethal without proper shielding." Sarah finished. "But look at these readings. The flare is creating a gravitational slipstream. If we time it right." Marcus's cybernetic eye whirred as he processed the data. "You want to ride the flare?" "Sarah, even with our shielding upgraded, the margins would be human," she said with a grin. "The margins would be human. That's exactly my point. Their computers will tell them it's impossible because they're calculating everything to the 9th decimal place. But I can feel it. The timing, the flow of it. It's like surfing a wave. A wave of stellar plasma that could vaporize the ship if you're off by half a second. Then I won't be off by half a second." Sarah checked the race clock. "How fast can you modify the shielding?" Marcus sighed, but she could see the excitement in his organic eye. "Fast enough. But the neural load of processing a route that close to a solar flare will be intense," Sarah agreed. "But we've been approaching this wrong. Instead of trying to process everything, let's lean into human intuition. Strip down the data feed. Give me the bare minimum I need to feel the gravitational flows. No numbers, no calculations, just pure sensation. The officials will think we've lost our minds. The officials think we lost our minds when we showed up with a human pilot. Sarah placed her hand on the ghost's hull. They keep trying to prove humans are too slow by measuring our neural processing speed. But speed isn't just about how fast you can think. It's about knowing which thoughts matter. Marcus was already working, his augmented hands moving across the ghost's systems with practiced efficiency. Reconfiguring neural interface now. You'll be flying almost blind compared to the others. I'll be flying human. Sarah corrected. And maybe that's exactly what this race needs. As the minutes ticked down to race time, Sarah felt an unusual calm settle over her. The other pilots would be running millions of simulations, their quantum computers calculating every possible outcome. She looked at the course projection again, watching the massive solar flare twist through space like a river of fire. Her ancestors had crossed oceans by reading the waves, navigated continents by following the stars. They hadn't needed quantum computers to tell them how to move with the forces of nature. They had learned to feel it, to become part of it. Now Sarah would do the same thing at relativistic speeds. Neural interface recalibrated. Marcus announced. Shield modifications complete. You'll have about 3 seconds of protection if you hit the flare directly. I won't, Sarah said with certainty, because I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to dance with it. The race warning chimed. 10 minutes to start. Sarah climbed into the ghost's cockpit, feeling the stripped-down neural interface connect. Where before there had been a flood of data, now there was something purer. She could feel the gravitational tides, the magnetic fields, the dance of particles in space, not as numbers or vectors, but as sensations, as music. The other pilots might be faster at processing data, but Sarah was about to show them that sometimes the best way to win wasn't to be the fastest thinker, but to think differently entirely. She powered up the ghost's engines, listening to their song. Ahead of her, a star was about to remind the galaxy that nature couldn't be conquered by calculations alone. And a human was about to remind them what it meant to truly understand speed. The starting grid hummed with tension as 8 ships hovered in formation. Sarah's ghost hung at the back of the pack, its modified shielding drawing curious glances from the inspection drones. Through the neural interface, she could feel the solar flare's influence already beginning to twist the local spacetime. Final systems check complete. Marcus's voice came through clear despite the electromagnetic interference. Shield integrity at maximum. Remember, if anything feels wrong. I pull out, Sarah finished, but it won't come to that. A Sktheri ship ahead of her was emanating patterns of confident superiority, their version of pre-race intimidation. Sarah knew their quantum computers were calculating optimal escape vectors, preparing for the moment when the solar flare would force them all to detour around its lethal energies. The race countdown began. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the ghost's modified interface feed her pure sensation. The gravitational tides pulled at her awareness like ocean currents. The magnetic fields sang in her nerves. And there, just at the edge of perception, she felt the rhythm of the flare itself, nature's own fusion dance. 3, 2, 1. The starting pulse fired, and 8 ships lunged forward into the vacuum. Sarah kept the ghost in a middle position as they accelerated to racing velocity, watching the others' formations. As predicted, they were already beginning to curve away from the flare's path, their computers plotting safe routes through the stellar storm. Then she felt it, a subtle shift in the gravitational harmonics. Something wasn't right. Marcus, she said sharply, check the Alteran's wake pattern. A moment of silence. Then, debris. They're venting microscopically charged particles. In this magnetic field, they're trying to create a particle web. Sarah finished. She could feel it forming behind the lead ship, a near-invisible net of charged particles that would disrupt shields and destabilize drive fields. A classic racing accident that would be impossible to prove intentional. The other pilots, focused on their computational approach, hadn't noticed. Their computers were dismissing the particle distribution as background noise, too focused on calculating safe vectors around the solar flare. But Sarah felt the pattern. And she felt something else. The way the particle web was interacting with the flare's magnetic field. The Alterans hadn't accounted for that. Their sabotage attempt was about to cascade into something much more dangerous. All ships, break formation. She broadcast. Particle magnetic cascade imminent. The response was immediate and dismissive. Human pilot, cease attempting to distract superior neural processors. Came the Scatheri reply. Our calculations show no such possibility. Sarah watched the magnetic fields begin to twist as the particle web grew. They had seconds at most. She could pull away now, save herself. The human thing to do would be to protect her own ship. But that wasn't the right thing to do. Instead, she pushed the ghost forward, accelerating straight toward the developing cascade. Marcus, divert all power to forward shields. I'm going to disrupt the pattern. Sarah, the energy readings. Trust me, I can feel the flow. The ghost surged forward as Sarah guided it directly into the invisible web of charged particles. The other pilots, still convinced their computers knew best, maintained their original courses. But now Sarah could see the Alteran ship beginning to pull away sharply. They had finally realized their mistake. The particle web began to glow as it interacted with the solar flare's magnetic field. Sarah felt rather than saw the moment of criticality approaching. With a deep breath, she did something no computer would ever calculate. She cut her shields completely. For a fraction of a second, the ghost was totally exposed to the vacuum of space. In that same moment, Sarah fired a precisely calibrated burst from her maneuvering thrusters, using the ghost's own ion wake to disrupt the particle pattern before it could catalyze. The web collapsed, its energy dispersing harmlessly into space rather than cascading into a destructive chain reaction. The other pilots' computers finally registered the danger that had passed, sending confusion through the racing channels. But Sarah was already moving. While the others were still processing what had happened, she swung the ghost into the path she'd been preparing for all along, directly into the slipstream of the solar flare. Impossible trajectory detected, the race control AI announced. Human pilot, your course intersects with. Sarah muted the channel. The ghost's hull thrummed as it skimmed the edge of the stellar eruption, riding the gravitational wave like a surfer on the perfect break. The sensation through the neural interface was overwhelming. Pure energy, pure motion, pure instinct. She felt more than steered through the plasma currents, letting her human intuition guide the ghost through spaces too chaotic for even quantum computers to calculate. The flare's energy should have overwhelmed her sensors, should have overloaded her neural interface, should have done a dozen things that alien technology said were inevitable. Instead, she danced. When the ghost emerged from the other side of the flare, Sarah was 3 lengths ahead of the nearest competitor. The race channel exploded with activity as the other pilots and their computers tried to process what they had just witnessed. But Sarah wasn't listening. She was already focused on the finish line, letting the ghost ride the gravitational echoes of her solar slingshot. She had shown them something beyond computation. She had shown them human grace. And the race was only half over. The aftermath of the solar flare race changed everything. As Sarah stood in the ghost's maintenance bay, watching Marcus repair the heat-scarred hull plates, a steady stream of visitors kept finding reasons to pass by. Some were other pilots. Others were engineers. All of them were curious. Your trajectory through the flare's gravitational wake was theoretically impossible, stated a young foreign engineer, their crystalline form shifting through patterns of fascination. Our simulations show at least 8 points where your ship should have been torn apart. Sarah smiled, running her hand along the ghost's hull. Theory and practice are different things. Your simulations probably didn't account for human instinct. Instinct, the foreign repeated, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. Our data suggests that organic intuition is inherently inferior to quantum computation. Does your data tell you why I'm still alive? Sarah asked, or why I finish 3 lengths ahead of ships with superior technology? The foreign's patterns shifted to uncertainty. Before they could respond, another voice cut in, the distinctive harmonics of a Sc-30 pilot. She is correct. Tlay, the youngest of the Sc-30 racers, stepped into view. I have reviewed the sensor logs 26,000 times. The human success cannot be explained by our traditional models. Coming from a Sc-30, this was practically a revolution. Their species prided themselves on being able to calculate every variable, predict every outcome. For one of them to admit the limits of their approach was unprecedented. The way you moved through the flare, Tlay continued, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. It was beautiful, like watching stellar wind shape a nebula. Natural. Flowing. Sarah nodded. That's exactly it. Instead of fighting the forces involved, I worked with them. Let them guide me. You trusted your primitive neural architecture over computational certainty, the foreign observed. It should not have succeeded. Maybe we need to redefine what we mean by primitive, Marcus interjected, looking up from his repairs. You're also focused on processing speed that you've forgotten what organic brains evolved to do. Pattern recognition, intuitive leaps, split-second adaptability. Tlay's antenna twitched with interest. You believe these traits are valuable in racing. I believe they're essential, Sarah said. The universe isn't just mathematics. It's rhythm, flow, instinct. Sometimes you need to feel the race, not calculate it. The foreign's crystalline form sparkled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. Could you demonstrate? Perhaps explain how your neural interface translates racing data into these intuitive patterns. Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus, who nodded slightly. This was what they had hoped for, not just proving humans could compete, but showing there was value in their different approach. Better than that, Sarah said. I'll show you how to modify your own interfaces to work with your natural instincts rather than trying to override them. Over the next few days, a quiet revolution began in the racing circuit. Sarah and Marcus found themselves at the center of an unlikely collaboration. The foreign engineer, whose name translated roughly to seeker of hidden paths, began developing new ways to present racing data that worked with pilots' innate sensory capabilities rather than raw computation. Tlay brought other young pilots, each curious about this strange human approach that defied their training. Even some of the more experienced racers started to watch with interest as Sarah demonstrated how to feel the gravitational tides, how to read the magnetic currents like ancient sailors reading the wind. Not everyone approved. The racing establishment, particularly the older Sc-30 pilots, dismissed it as a dangerous regression. Next, they'll suggest we navigate by stellar omens, one veteran racer complained. But something had changed. In practice runs, Sarah noticed other pilots beginning to experiment. They weren't abandoning their quantum computers. That would be foolish. But they were learning to integrate computation with instinct, to find a balance between calculation and feel. The Ghost's maintenance bay became an unofficial academy of what some were calling organic racing theory. Sarah found herself teaching principles that would have been familiar to Earth's ancient mariners, just applied to relativistic speeds and quantum states. The key is to stop thinking of space as empty, she explained to a group of fascinated pilots. It's alive with forces, with patterns, with rhythm. Your computers can map these patterns, but your instincts can feel them. Marcus, watching from his workbench, smiled as he saw the future of racing taking shape. The next generation of pilots wouldn't be limited by pure computation or pure instinct. They would have both, working in harmony. But first, they had to survive the championship race. The established powers of the racing world weren't going to let their dominance fade without a fight. And as Sarah prepared the Ghost for the final competition, she knew that more than the race title was at stake. This was about proving that progress didn't always mean abandoning the old ways for the new. Sometimes it meant finding the wisdom in what evolution had already perfected and building upon it. The championship would be more than a race. It would be a demonstration of what was possible when different species, different approaches, and different philosophies learned to work together. Sarah patted the ghost's hull, feeling the thrum of its systems through her palm. Ready to show them what the future looks like, old friend. The championship course was a navigator's nightmare. A twisting path through a binary star system's complex gravitational fields, ending with a sprint through an asteroid field still being torn apart by tidal forces. As Sarah ran her pre-race checks, she could hear the quantum computers of nearby ships humming as they calculated optimal routes. But she wasn't alone in her different approach anymore. Calay's ship now sported modified sensors that presented data in patterns matched to Scytheri's sensory perception. The young foreign engineer had equipped several ships with hybrid navigation systems that balanced computation with organic intuition. Course analysis complete, Marcus reported from the maintenance bay. The gravitational crosscurrents in the binary system are even more complex than we expected. The traditional racing line will be nearly impossible to hold. Good thing we're not planning to hold it, Sarah replied, feeling the ghost systems sync with her neural interface. The sensation had evolved, no longer just raw data or pure feeling, but a harmony of both. How many are using our modifications? 6 ships, including Calay's. The rest are sticking with pure computation. Sarah nodded. The old guard, led by the decorated Scytheri champion Vextix, had denounced the organic racing movement as a dangerous abandonment of progress. This race would settle the argument one way or another. The starting grid crackled with tension as 12 of the galaxy's fastest ships took their positions. Sarah felt a ping from Calay's communications, a gesture of respect among pilots who had learned to trust more than just their computers. Attention all pilots, the race control AI announced. Final warning. Gravitational fluctuations in the binary system have exceeded predicted parameters. Maximum computational safety margins cannot be guaranteed. Sarah smiled. The computers couldn't guarantee safety because the system was too chaotic, too alive with competing forces. But that chaos was exactly what she and her fellow organic racing pioneers had trained for. The countdown began. When the starting pulse fired, the field of ships broke into immediate chaos. The traditional pilots shot forward along their pre-calculated optimal paths, while Sarah and her allies spread out, each feeling their way through the gravitational tide. The first challenge came at the binary star's gravitational crossroads. The computed routes all tried to thread the same narrow corridor of stable space, creating a dangerous bottleneck. Sarah watched Vextix's ship lead the computational pack into the corridor, their quantum processors adjusting trajectories microsecond by microsecond. But she had felt something else, a gravitational resonance creating temporary slipstreams through the chaos. Without hesitation, she swung the ghost into one of these ephemeral paths. Through the neural interface, she sensed Calais and 2 other ships following her lead, their pilots trusting their enhanced instincts. Impossible trajectory detected, the race AI warned as Sarah's group carved new paths through the binary system. Gravitational forces exceed sustainable parameters. But they weren't fighting the gravity. They were dancing with it, letting the natural forces guide them through spaces that existed between the calculated safe zones, where the computational ships fought for position in their narrow corridor. Sarah's group flowed through the chaos like water through rapids. They emerged from the binary system's heart with a significant lead, but the greatest challenge still lay ahead, the asteroid field. Here, traditional racing strategy called for plotting the widest, safest route possible. The debris field was too unpredictable for close maneuvering at racing speeds. Sarah had other ideas. All allied ships, she broadcast on their private channel. Sync your neural feeds. Feel the pattern of the debris, not just its position. The asteroid field wasn't random chaos. It was a dynamic system, every piece affecting every other piece. The computational ships began their wide detour, but Sarah led her squadron straight into the heart of the field. Through their linked neural interfaces, The pilots shared their instinctive understanding of the debris patterns. Where computers saw millions of individual trajectories to calculate, they felt the flow of the entire field. The Ghost wove through gaps that existed for split seconds, followed closely by her allies. They weren't just racing anymore. They were proving a point about the future of space travel itself. The final stretch opened up before them, a clear sprint to the finish line. But Vix-Tix's ship, having taken the computational route around the asteroid field, had managed to stay close enough to remain a threat. The defending champions' quantum engines roared as they attempted to close the gap. "They're redlining their processors," Marcus warned, pushing beyond safety limits to calculate a perfect approach vector. Sarah felt the Ghost's systems harmonizing perfectly with her neural interface. "Let them calculate. We'll do what humans do best: adapt." She didn't try to match Vix-Tix's raw speed. Instead, she rolled the Ghost into the quantum wake of a passing asteroid, using its gravitational signature to slingshot forward. It was the kind of maneuver that looked suicidal on paper, but felt perfect in execution. The finish line flashed past in a blur of motion, but Sarah already knew the result. The Ghost had crossed first, followed by Tile and the other organic racing pioneers. Vix-Tix's ship screamed across several seconds later, its quantum processors smoking from the strain of trying to outthink physics itself. As the race officials confirmed her victory, Sarah looked out at the asteroid field they had just traversed. The debris continued its eternal dance, indifferent to the little ships that had woven through its midst. Nature hadn't changed, but their way of working with it had. "Congratulations, Champion Chen." Tile's voice came through clear and sincere. "You have shown us a new way forward." Sarah smiled, feeling the Ghost settle into its berth. "Not new," she corrected. "Just remembered. Sometimes the oldest instincts are the best teachers."